There are some houses that people forget, and then there are some houses that people choose to forget. This was one of them. At the far end of a narrow, dirt road, just beyond where the town seemed to quietly disappear into trees and silence, there stood a house that had not changed in over 60 years. It wasn't destroyed, it wasn't broken, and it wasn't completely abandoned. It was simply closed. The windows were covered from the inside. The door was locked from the outside, and the air around it carried a stillness that felt unnatural, not empty, but waiting. Most people in the town knew about the house, but no one talked about it for long. If you asked for directions, they wouldn't say, "Turn left at the old house." They would say, "Turn before you reach that place." As if even mentioning it too clearly would bring back something that had been buried a long time ago. For 60 years, no one had opened the house. Not the front door, not the windows, not even the back entrance that had long since been swallowed by overgrown weeds and broken wood. It simply stood there, untouched by time, yet untouched by people as well. And that was what made it different, because time always leaves marks. Paint fades, wood rots, roofs collapse, but this house still stood, almost perfectly, as if someone had closed it carefully and made sure it stayed that way. If you are drawn to forgotten places, sealed secrets, and stories that were never meant to be uncovered, then subscribe to Shadows of History, because what was hidden inside this house stayed hidden for 60 years. The road leading to the house had not been used in decades. Grass had grown over parts of it. Tree branches leaned in from both sides, forming a kind of tunnel that blocked out the sky. Even during the day, the path felt darker than it should, and at the end of that path, the house waited. 2 windows in the front, a narrow wooden porch, a door that had not been opened in years. From a distance, it looked like any other old house. But as you got closer, something changed. The silence became heavier, the air felt colder, and the feeling that someone might be watching you from inside the house, even though you knew no one was there, became impossible to ignore. For decades, no one approached it. Children were warned to stay away. Travelers avoided the road, and the few who did pass by never stopped long enough to look inside. But time changes things, and eventually, it changed this too. The land the house stood on was sold. The new owner was not from the town. He did not know the stories. He did not feel the same quiet fear that had kept everyone else away. To him, it was just an old property, an unused structure, something that could be repaired, cleaned, and brought back to life. When he told the people in town about his plan to open the house, they did not try to stop him, but their reaction was enough to make anyone pause. They became quiet, uncomfortable. Some avoided the conversation entirely. Others gave short answers. Only one man said something directly, an old man, who had lived in the town longer than anyone else. "If you open that house," the old man said slowly, "don't trust what you see inside." The owner frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the direction of the house, as if remembering something. Then he said quietly, "Because what's hidden in that place isn't always in plain sight." The warning was strange, but not enough to stop him. A week later, he arrived at the house with a small team of workers. They brought tools, ladders, wood, and supplies. To them, this was just another job. Fix the structure, clean the inside, repair the damage, and move on. The first step was simple. Open the door. The lock on the front door was old, but not broken. That alone was unusual. Most abandoned houses had damaged doors, broken locks, or signs of forced entry. This one was still sealed, as if it had been closed and then left exactly that way. One of the workers stepped forward and struck the lock with a hammer. The sound echoed through the trees. Once, twice, and on the third strike, the lock broke. The door creaked open slowly, and for the first time in 60 years, light entered the house. Dust filled the air immediately, rising in slow motion as the door opened wider. The smell of old wood, trapped air, and something deeper, something harder to describe, spread through the entrance. The workers stepped inside carefully. The floor creaked under their weight, but it held. The room was exactly as it had been left. A table stood in the center, 2 chairs beside it, A cabinet against the wall. Nothing overturned. Nothing broken. Everything still. As if someone had simply stood up and never returned. That's strange, one worker said quietly. What? The owner asked. It doesn't look abandoned, the worker replied. It looks paused. And that was the right word. Paused. Like time had stopped in that house. The workers moved through the room slowly. Every object they found told the same story. Clothes still hanging. Dishes still placed. Furniture untouched. No signs of struggle. No signs of damage. Just silence. Then they reached the hallway. And that was when the second strange thing happened. The hallway was shorter than it should have been. The owner stopped and looked at the wall at the end. Then he turned back and looked at the outside of the house through the window. Something didn't match. This doesn't make sense, he said. What doesn't? One of the workers asked. The size, the owner replied. The house is bigger from the outside. The workers looked at each other. Then one of them stepped forward and placed his hand against the wall at the end of the hallway. He knocked on it lightly. The sound came back, dull at first. Then he knocked again. This time harder. And the sound that came back was different. Not solid. Not thick. But hollow. The workers stepped back slowly. That's not a normal wall, he said. The room fell silent again. The owner stepped forward and placed his own hand against the wall. It felt solid, cold, still. But when he knocked on it, the same sound came back. Hollow. Like there was space behind it. A space that should not exist. Because according to the layout of the house, there was no room there. And yet, the wall said otherwise. The owner looked at the workers, then back at the wall. And in that moment, the house was no longer just an old building that needed repair. It had become something else. A question. A mystery. A place where something had been hidden. Not lost. Not forgotten. But deliberately concealed. Behind a wall. For 60 years. And whatever was behind that wall had been waiting. In complete darkness. All that time. Long before the wall was discovered. Long before the house was opened. And long before silence settled over that place. There was a family. They were not well known in town. Not because they were disliked. But because they were distant, quiet. Private. The kind of people who lived close enough to be seen. But far enough to remain unknown. The house at the end of the road was not always avoided. Once it was simply where they lived. A man. A woman. And a child. That was all anyone ever saw. No visitors. No extended family. No friends staying over. Just the three of them, living their lives behind those walls. The father worked occasionally in town. He was skilled with wood, repairs, carving, small construction jobs. He spoke little, but he worked well. People trusted his hands, even if they didn't fully understand him. The mother rarely spoke at all. When she came into town, she stayed close to the child. Her eyes moved often, watching people, watching the surroundings, as if she was always expecting something, or avoiding something. And the child was the one people remembered the most. Not because she talked, but because she didn't. She was always quiet, always holding something in her hands. A small object, a toy, something she never let go of. One woman in the town once said something that stayed with her for years. She didn't look scared, the woman said. She looked like she was listening. At the time, no one understood what that meant. Listening to what? There was nothing there. Nothing unusual. Nothing out of place. At least, nothing anyone could see. The family followed a pattern. They came into town once every few weeks, bought supplies, spoke very little, and returned home before sunset. Always before sunset. That part, people remembered clearly. They never stayed after dark. Not once. At first, it seemed like a habit. Then it started to feel like a rule. And then something changed. One season passed. Then another. And slowly, the family stopped coming to town. At first, no one thought much of it. People in rural areas sometimes stayed home for long periods, especially during harsh weather. But this was different, because no one saw them leave. No wagon, no packed belongings, no sign of movement, just absence. A quiet disappearance. Weeks turned into months. Some people assumed the family had moved away during the night. Others believed something must have happened. But no one had proof. And without proof, people chose the simplest explanation. They left. That was the story the town accepted, because it was easier. Easier than asking questions. Easier than walking to that house and knocking on the door. Easier than finding out something they might not want to know. But not everyone was comfortable with that answer. One man, a traveler passing through the area, stopped near the house one evening to rest. His horse was tired. The road was quiet. And the house, though strange, still looked like a place someone might live. He walked up to the door and knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. He was about to leave when he heard something. A sound. Not from the trees. Not from the road. From inside the house. He stepped closer, pressed his ear against the door, and listened. At first, nothing. Then, a faint sound. Very faint. So faint that he almost convinced himself it wasn't real. But then it came again. Knock. 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 Not loud. Not fast. Slow. Weak. As if it came from a distance. From somewhere deeper inside the house. Or somewhere behind it. Or even beyond it. The traveler stepped back immediately. His expression changed. He knocked on the door again, louder this time. "Hello," he called out. "Is anyone inside?" No answer. Only silence. He waited for a moment longer. Then he left. The next morning, he told people in town what he had heard. Most of them dismissed it. Old houses make noise, someone said. Wood expands, contracts, it's normal. Probably an animal, another added. That place has been empty for months. The traveler listened to them, but he did not look convinced. That didn't sound like an animal, he said quietly. That sounded like someone trying to get out. The room fell silent for a moment. Then someone changed the subject. And just like that, the story was pushed aside, ignored, buried under easier explanations, but did not end there. A few days later, another man passed by the house. He had heard the story. He did not fully believe it, but curiosity brought him closer. He didn't knock on the door this time. He walked around the house instead, slowly, carefully, and that was when he noticed something strange. Near the base of the house, there was a narrow gap, a crawl space, barely large enough to see inside. He crouched down and looked toward it. At first, it was just darkness. Then he leaned closer, and that was when he heard it. Knock, knock, knock. The same sound. Slow, faint, coming from below, from behind the wall, or maybe from somewhere deeper. He stood up quickly, stepped back, and looked at the house differently now. Not as an empty building, but as something else. Something that might not be empty at all. He returned to town and told what he had heard. This time, people listened, but they did not act, because now the feeling had changed. It was no longer curiosity. It was unease, and unease has a way of turning into silence. Two men eventually agreed to go to the house together, not to investigate deeply, just to check, to confirm, to prove that there was nothing there. They went during the day, when the light was strong, when fear feels smaller, when everything seems easier to explain. When they reached the house, they noticed something immediately. The windows. They were covered, from the inside, boards nailed across them, not broken, not damaged, placed there intentionally. The men looked at each other. Then one of them knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. Then the second man walked around the side of the house. He stopped suddenly. "What is it?" the first man asked. The second man didn't answer immediately. He was looking down, toward the base of the wall, at the crawl space. And then, they both heard it. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was faint, but clear. And this time, there was no doubt. It was coming from inside, from behind the wall, from somewhere that should not have had anyone inside it. The men stood frozen, listening. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke, because in that moment, they both understood something. If that sound was real, then the story they had accepted was wrong. The family had not left, and whatever was behind that wall had been there all along. But instead of breaking the wall, instead of opening the house, instead of finding the truth, they made a decision. They stepped back, and they walked away, because sometimes the fear of what you might find is stronger than the need to know. And that decision, that single moment of hesitation, was the moment the truth remained hidden for 60 years. Because after that day, no one returned to listen again. No one knocked on the door, and no one checked the wall. The house was closed, and the story of the family slowly faded, turned into rumor, then into memory, then into silence. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind moved through the trees, and the road was empty, some people said they still heard it. Not loud, not clear, but enough to make them stop walking, enough to make them turn back. A sound, faint, slow, and steady. Knock, knock, knock to be why the time the workers realized the wall did not match the structure of the house. It was no longer just a repair job. It had become something else. A question that had been ignored for 60 years. And now, for the first time, someone was about to answer it. The hallway felt narrower than before. Or maybe, it just felt different now. Because once you notice something that doesn't belong, you can't unsee it. The owner stood in front of the wall, staring at it in silence. From the outside, the house was wider. From the inside, something was missing. Space did not disappear on its own. Rooms don't just vanish, unless someone removes them, or hides them. Break it, the owner said quietly. The words hung in the air for a moment. No one moved immediately. Not because they didn't understand the order, but because every man in that hallway felt the same thing. The same hesitation, the same weight, the feeling that whatever was behind that wall was not meant to be seen. One of the workers stepped forward slowly. He lifted the hammer, and for a brief moment, he paused, as if listening. The house was completely silent. No wind, no movement, no sound. Then, he struck the wall. The impact echoed through the hallway. A dull, heavy sound. Not solid, not empty. Something in between. He struck it again. This time, a thin crack appeared across the surface. Dust fell from the wall, drifting slowly to the floor. The other workers stepped back slightly, watching, waiting. He struck it a third time. The crack spread wider. And this time, something changed. The sound. It was no longer just the sound of wood breaking. There was something else mixed into it. A faint echo. Like the space behind the wall was larger than expected. Hollow. One worker whispered. The man with the hammer didn't respond. He struck the wall again. Harder. The wood split open. A small section broke away and fell to the ground. And behind it, darkness. Not shadow. Not a gap. But a space. A real space. A hidden space. The men stared at the opening. No one spoke. Because in that moment, the house was no longer hiding something. It had revealed it. Just a little. Enough to confirm what none of them wanted to say out loud. There's a room back there, one of the workers said quietly. The owner stepped closer to the broken section of the wall. He reached out and touched the edge of the opening. The wood was thick, layered, reinforced. This was not a simple wall. This was a barrier, built carefully, built intentionally, built to keep something inside, or to keep something from getting out. Keep going, the owner said. The workers began breaking the wall piece by piece. Each strike of the hammer echoed louder than the last. Wood cracked. Dust filled the air. Fragments fell to the ground. And slowly, the opening grew larger. With every piece removed, the darkness behind the wall became clearer, deeper, heavier, as if it had been waiting for this moment. After several minutes, the hole was large enough to see inside. But the light from the hallway was not enough to reach the back of the space. Lantern, the owner said. One of the workers brought the lantern forward and held it near the opening. The flame flickered slightly as it approached the dark space. Then the light moved inside, slowly, carefully, revealing the edges of the hidden room. The walls were close, covered in aged wood. The floor was bare, uneven. And then, the light reached further in, and something appeared. A shape, low to the ground, rectangular. Still, is that? One of the workers started to say. No one finished the sentence, because they were all seeing it at the same time. A bed, a small bed, inside the sealed room. The worker holding the lantern froze. His hand trembled slightly, because a bed inside a hidden room only meant one thing. Sun had been there, not just for a moment, not by accident, but intentionally. And not freely. The owner stepped back slightly. His face had changed. Curiosity was gone. Now there was only realization. "We're opening all of it," he said. No one argued. The wall continued to come down. Faster now. Less careful. Because the truth was already breaking through. Piece by piece, the sealed room was revealed. The opening became wide enough for a man to step through. But no one entered immediately. Because now, they could see more of the bed. A chair beside it. A lantern placed on the floor. And something small, resting near the edge of the bed. The worker moved the light closer. And the object became clear. A toy. A small wooden toy. Worn with time. But still recognizable. A child's toy. The room fell completely silent. Because now, there was no doubt. This was not a hidden storage space. This was not an unused room. This was a place someone had lived. Or been kept. Or been placed. And never allowed to leave. One of the workers finally spoke. His voice low. Almost afraid of the words he was about to say. Someone was inside here. No one responded. Because they all knew it was true. The owner took a step forward and stood at the entrance of the hidden room. The lantern light moved across the walls. And that was when they saw something else. Marks. Scratches. Lines carved into the wood. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Not random. Not accidental. Repeated. Organized. Like someone had been counting. Days. Time. Or something else. The air in the hallway felt heavier now. The house no longer felt empty. It felt filled. Filled with something that had been waiting. Waiting for someone to finally break the wall. Waiting for someone to finally see what had been hidden for 60 years. The owner looked at the workers. Then back into the room. And in that moment, everything changed. Because the question was no longer, what is behind this wall? The question now was, who was in here and what happened to them? And the answer was somewhere inside that room, still hidden, still waiting, in the darkness, after 60 years. By the time the wall was completely removed, there was no longer any doubt. The house had been hiding something, not by accident, not by time, but by design. For 60 years, that room had remained sealed, cut off from light, cut off from air, cut off from the world, and now for the first time, it was open. The men stood at the entrance of the hidden space, staring into the darkness. No one spoke, because what they were looking at was not just a room. It was evidence. Evidence of something that had been done, something that had been planned, and something that had been kept hidden for far too long. The owner took a slow breath, then stepped inside. The air changed immediately. It was colder, heavier, not the kind of cold that comes from weather, but the kind that comes from a place untouched. Unseen, forgotten. The lantern light moved across the room as he stepped further in. The bed was small. Too small for an adult. The blanket on it had faded with time, but its shape still held the memory of someone who had once rested there. The chair beside it faced the bed, positioned in a way that felt intentional, as if someone had spent long hours sitting there, watching, waiting, or perhaps guarding. The other workers followed slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last, because the deeper they moved into that room, the more real everything became. The scratches on the wall were clearer now, lines carved one after another, some straight, some uneven, some deeper than others, as if whoever made them had grown weaker over time. "There are too many," one worker whispered. No one answered, because counting them was no longer important. Understanding them was. And everyone in that room understood the same thing. Those marks were not random. They were time, days, or nights, or something worse. The passing of time in a place where time should never have passed. The lantern light shifted toward the far corner of the room, and that was when they saw it. A small wooden box, partially buried in dust, still intact. The owner walked toward it slowly. Every step felt deliberate, careful, because by now, they all knew. Whatever answers existed were inside this room, and that box was holding part of the truth. He knelt down, placed the lantern beside him, and reached for the box. His hands paused for just a moment before opening it, not because he was unsure, but because he understood something very clearly. Once the truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. He opened the box. Inside were a few simple items. A piece of cloth. Worn. Folded carefully. A small metal object. And beneath them, a piece of paper. Folded. Aged. Fragile. But still there. Still waiting. The owner lifted it slowly. Unfolded it carefully. The paper cracked slightly along the edges. But the writing remained. Faded. Uneven. Written by a hand that had not been steady. He stared at it for a moment. Then began to read. His voice low. Almost hesitant. If anyone finds this. The room became completely still. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Please understand we did not choose this. One of the workers lowered his head. Another stepped back slightly. He told us it was temporary. That it was for protection. The owner paused. Then continued. We believed him. A long silence followed. Because now, the truth was beginning to take shape. The door was closed. Then the wall was built. The words echoed softly in the small room. We waited for it to open again. The lantern flickered slightly, but it never did. No one moved. No one spoke, because every word was heavier than the last. We called out. We knocked. The owner's voice slowed. We thought someone would hear us. One of the workers closed his eyes, but no one came. The silence that followed felt endless. Then came the final lines. The words that would stay with them long after they left that house. If you are reading this, the owner's hands trembled slightly. Please tell them. He took a slow breath. Then read the final sentence. We were not missing. We were sealed. The paper slipped slightly in his hands. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to say. The truth had been hidden for 60 years. And now, it was finally known. The family had not disappeared. They had not left. They had not run away. They had been placed inside that room. And the room had been closed. Sealed. Hidden behind a wall. While the world outside continued to move forward. The knocking that had been heard was real. The sounds people had dismissed were real. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was the result of being unheard. The owner slowly folded the paper, placed it back into the box, and stood up. He looked around the room one last time. At the bed, at the chair, at the scratches on the wall, at the space that had held a story no one had been willing to uncover. Then he stepped out. The workers followed. One by one. No one looked back, because they didn't need to. The room had already said everything. Back in the hallway, the house felt different. Not mysterious. Not unknown. Just heavy. Heavy with truth. Heavy with silence. Heavy with something that had been ignored for far too long. The owner stood near the broken wall, looking at the opening, then at the rest of the house. And in that moment, he understood something. This was not just a story about a hidden room. It was a story about what happens when people hear something and choose not to listen, because the truth had never been completely hidden. It had made itself known, in small ways, in quiet sounds, in faint knocking. But those signs had been ignored, dismissed, forgotten. And because of that, the people inside that room were never saved. The house was not repaired. It was not restored. It was not lived in again. It remained exactly as it was. A place where a wall once stood. And behind that wall, a truth that had waited 60 years to be found. Because sometimes, the darkest secrets are not hidden far away. They are hidden in plain sight. Behind walls, under floors, inside silence. And sometimes, all it takes to uncover them is the decision to look closer, to listen longer, and to act. Before it is too late that in the end, the house was never truly empty. For 60 years, it stood in silence, not because there was nothing inside, but because everything inside had already been decided. The family that once lived there did not disappear. They did not leave in the night. They were not lost to time. They were placed behind a wall. Sealed into a space where light could not reach, where sound could not escape, and where time slowly turned into something unbearable. The hidden room was not an accident. It was not a forgotten part of the house. It was built to close something off, to hide something permanently. And for decades it worked. People passed by the house. They heard stories. Some even heard sounds. Knocking. Faint. Weak. But instead of asking questions, they chose silence. Because silence is easier. Easier than breaking a wall. easier than facing the truth, easier than discovering something that cannot be undone. But the truth never disappears. It waits, in darkness, in stillness, in places where no one wants to look, waiting for the moment someone finally decides to open what was never meant to be opened. The scratches on the wall were not just marks. They were time being counted, hope slowly fading, a life measured in days inside a space that should never have existed. The bed was not just a place to rest. It was proof that someone tried to survive. The toy was not just an object. That it was a reminder that innocence was trapped in that darkness. And the letter was a voice that survived 60 years just to tell the truth. We were not missing, we were sealed. Those words did not just describe what happened in that room. They revealed something deeper, something more disturbing, because the most frightening part of this story is not what was done inside that house. It is what was not done outside of it. People heard something. People felt something. People knew something was wrong. And still, nothing was done. No wall was broken. No door was opened. No one went far enough to find the truth. And sometimes, that is where the real horror lies. Not in the act itself, but in the silence that allowed it to continue. Today, the house still stands. Older, quieter, but no longer unknown. The wall is gone. The room is open. And the truth is no longer hidden. But the feeling remains. That heavy, unsettling feeling. That something terrible once happened there. And it could have been stopped. If someone had listened. If someone had acted. If someone had chosen to look beyond the surface. Because some secrets are not buried by time. They are buried by people. And sometimes, the only thing separating the truth from the world is a single wall. And the decision to break it.